There are very few certainties in life, but here is one. Wherever you are, you're always going to be at some place. This is an inescapable part of human life, that from the minute you are born until the minute you die, you will always be at some location somewhere. You might get lost along the way and try to figure out how to get home, but you can never really change the fact that you are always at some place. Part of human life and part of being a human is simply to be somewhere. And this is a very fundamental insight that we all have of our own lives. But there is a strange thing about this, and that is that when we look at someone else, it can be a little bit different. Most of us actually have the feeling that when we spend time with others, they might be present in the room, but at the same time, you can sometimes get the feeling that they are not really there. And in fact, anyone who has spent many years perhaps in a long-term relationship knows this for sure. That the guy there on the couch, he's not really here. Or have you ever had that feeling you went to a meeting and you didn't really meet anyone? Yeah, I know what that feels like. So the strange thing here is that even though this is one of the most fundamental things in our lives and the fundamental aspect of human being, we don't really have a language for this. We don't know how to talk about the fact that we can be more or less present. This is actually kind of strange. We've been looking into a phenomenon in the Geminoid lab that we call blended presence, and this is what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The thing about having your own Android really is that I actually have two bodies. And that means that I can be at two places at a time. One of my gifted coworkers recently phrased it another way. She said, now you have the scary ability and very rare ability to be absent at two places at the same time. Which goes to say that we can invent all these funny technologies and that's fine, but maybe it's not always the solution to the real problem. The thing is that when people meet the Geminoid DK or other androids, something strange is happening that we seek to understand and try to figure out models for. The thing is that there is, of course, the perception of the robot. Most people will realize pretty soon that this is a robot. Although we do sometimes give presentations and people will come and look. They will say hi to the robot, they'll say hi to me, they'll leave again. We can hear them in the hallway. Where's the android? Where's the robot? Which is kind of fun. But mostly it's easy to see that there is something going on here. This is a robot. But you also see the human form and perceive this as something that is special. And we are raised to believe that the human form should be something that we should respect and we should handle in specific ways. So what we think is going on when people meet something like this is actually that the two of those images kind of blend. And this is what we're trying to understand better in this aspect of the Android reality. We have the sense of what presence is, although it can be hard to explain sometimes. And on one hand, there was the one hand, people will realize that this is a robot, but that's not really what they react to. So you see this is a machine, but that's not it. On the other hand, you do see this as the human form, or perhaps even as a human, and realize that there was someone inside trying to communicate with you. But also, that is not really what you're interested in. What does happen is that those two concepts blend in your mind into a new thing that we call blended presence. And the intuition is then that this blended presence actually is something that moves along different axes. The most important of these axes is this one, between technology on one hand and the human form on the other hand. This here is a screenshot from a video that's been viewed a couple of million times on YouTube. And I think one of the reasons that this video has this appeal to people is that it actually embodies both aspects here of both the human and the android. When we look at the reactions that we get to these things online, especially on the YouTube channel, we get a lot of comments there. And we've been trying to analyze that. We see different things happening. We see some major themes in the way that people communicate about this. A lot of people talk about this in terms of science fiction. We get a lot of comments related to the Terminator universe, which for me is really strange. If you know me or spend some time with this guy, you soon realize that it's a far cry from the Terminator aspect. Other people will try to give us good advice on how to improve the robot, so they're actually addressing robotics in their comments. Some people will talk about politics, especially, yeah, I know this guy, I voted for him last season. Some people talk about religion, that can be also good and bad. And there's a lot of personal comments out there. Thanks, I wasn't planning on sleeping anyway, is one that happens a lot. Hey, that's my ex-husband, is another one. So we get a lot of those. We get mostly, the most comments are actually on one or the other side of the spectrum, which is interesting because it kind of corresponds to the scale that we were talking about to begin with. So in a couple of years, chances are that you are going to meet many, perhaps, androids around the world. So when you enter an office like this one, this is where he sits back home at Aalborg University, or when you go to the library and there is an android looking at you trying to give you advice in the books you're going to borrow, how are you going to react? That's actually what we're looking at. Are you going to go about this from the technology side or from the human side? Here's a couple of things that we've been doing over the last year that might shed a little bit of light on this. Here is the android sitting in my living room. I was supposed to be hosting a party, but I was away on business. My boss sent me on a business trip to Berlin, so I couldn't really be there. So we placed the android here in my living room, and the neighbors came over for a party. And when I came back from that trip, I found the android still sitting there. That's a load off. You don't want to be running around looking for your android. That's the last thing you want, really. What I also found was that there were a lot of beer on the table because all the neighbors were putting beers in front of him because they wanted to drink with him. Why is that? That's because the human form here is the most dominant side, right? See him primarily as a human being. Here was another scenario that we played with over the last couple of weeks, really. We dressed him up in a number of suits and stuff and tried to make him look as a mannequin. And then we put him in a shop window. So this is actually a shop window from my hometown. And you can see inside the window, you can actually glimpse the robot in there. So the idea here is that people can walk through the door and they can have a conversation with the mannequin. And in this case, for the most time, I was not even in the shop. I was sitting out in the back and I was controlling the robot, talking through him. What happens in there is that people find it very, very strange. And they go about this from the complete opposite reaction as what they did when he was sitting on my sofa. So even though we were having conversations and I would say hi when they come through the door, and I would suggest to them clothes on the shelves behind them or whatever, it would be fine. But they could still turn away from the conversation, turn to the shopkeeper and say, I wonder how he's made, what is functioning inside his head, as if I was not really a person, even though we were deeply engaged in conversation sometimes. So they saw him primarily there as the machine. But on the other hand, when I asked them, oh, why don't you come over and feel the sweater I'm wearing? Most people were reluctant. Now, this is strange. If it's really a machine, it's not that different from the mannequins in the window, although they didn't have a head, as you can see there. They're headless things. But it was very difficult to actually get people that close, because then the human form takes over again. But primarily, this is what we see. In my lab, we don't really work with children. We don't have experiments that involve children. But we do a lot of demonstrations in different places. And when we do that, people will often bring their children with them. And what happens then is actually a little bit strange. You see the young guy standing over there. He is, a couple of years from now, he's going to be in high school and he's going to be headed my way. So we'll find a job for him at the lab, clearly. That's going to be fun. Yeah. You see the anxiety and you see the fun that people are having when they're interacting with the android. That's actually a big part of it. But what we have noticed is that the very young minds have trouble trying to figure out what's going on here, because they see this. And what they see, of course, is the human form. And it fills up almost all of their minds. This is how we think about it. And what happens then is that they also think that there is something strange or funny about this character sitting there. But what is it exactly? There's really not room in their minds to try to figure out what's going on. And they think he's really spooky. But then what happens is that when we shut down the automated functions, so we take away the breathing system, we take away the blinking, we stop moving him around with the face, and he just sits like this. So now pretty much he's actually just a doll. And then we will play games like this one. For instance, could I ask you to stand up for just a second? Now let's pretend that you're a 5-year-old girl, just for the sake of the argument, and you're looking at this. And then can I ask you to say good night, robot? Good night, robot. Whoa, and he falls asleep. So now he's there really cozy and having a nice little dream. Would you be so kind as to maybe perhaps wake him up again? Say good morning, robot. Good morning, robot. Could you wake up? Oh, there he is again. So what happens here is now we actually, thank you very much. Yeah, I think a little applause maybe would be in order here. Losing pressure. So what happens here is really that now we're treating him like a toy, and then that makes it okay. And since he's now a toy, it's okay actually to play with him that way. Sometimes we can even have some of those funny movements of the eye. So the eyes can go fastly from one place to another place. Maybe there's a little bit of problem with the compressor out here. I think he's losing pressure. Are you getting tired, old buddy? Oh, there you go. So the eyes are now freakishly moving from one side to another. Ah, there you go. And maybe all the way over to the other side. Wow. You see that? See, interestingly, most of you are now laughing. If this has been a demonstration like in the shopping mall that we sometimes do, what typically would happen is that the small children, the young minds, they would be really okay with this again. Say, that's cool. Now we're okay with it. But the older ones, like the near grown-ups, they would be freaked out. And they would stop moving at all, just standing like this. Because then he becomes really, really scary. Because now he's just a guy sitting there and staring at you. Oh, the floor is not really even here. Can we move him up? And still interestingly, that the adults find him amusing also in this stage. So what's really going on here is a struggle in the mind between the human aspects of the robot and the mechanical aspect of the robot. Now we know that he's both, but the really important part is essentially not that, but the blend, the conceptual blend that comes in here between. Right. May I have my slides back? So what happens here with the children, actually, and with the adults in this situation, is that we go in both directions at the same time. So for some, the technology side takes over, and for others, the human form takes over. One of the ideas that we had originally was to put the robot, or similar robots, in kindergartens and let them play stories, tell stories for the kids. Have an android sitting there and telling the same story over and over and over again. It's kind of cool. So what are we doing today? Oh, we're going to have a story. Now, interestingly, many people objected to this idea and said, no, we don't want to do that. That's too spooky. Then I asked them, but what about television in this situation? Would that be okay? Yeah, that's fine. Let's have some television to tell stories. So what's the difference between the TV set and the robot? I know now. But I only know because we actually tried this with in front of so many children. The real difference is that the body here makes such an impact that it wouldn't work. They would be too scared of the robot for this to function. Here is another situation that we find ourselves in on a regular basis when we're moving just between short distances. This is how we do it. So we just put him there on the passenger seat. I often wonder how long it's going to stay that way. In a not too distant future, it might be the case that the robot is going to be in the other seat and I'll be in the passenger seat. We nearly have all the technologies that we need in order for this kind of stuff to fall into place. So if you were to see this in traffic, how would you react? Sometimes when we're driving around Aalborg, we see people who realize that, oh, the Android is out today, and they will start laughing at us, and things like that. Potentially a little bit dangerous, perhaps. Here's another situation. You know, we really get tired sometimes. This is taken from a hotel room in Oslo after a long day of demonstrations and stuff up there. So we're sitting here. Can you imagine having a companion like this? In this state, he's actually turned completely off, and conversations are kind of slow. What happens with this kind of technology is actually that it triggers a lot of interesting conversations. We're having a lot of those. And one of the themes that comes up just so often is the matter of, do you want a person in your life like this that you can turn on, or do you want one that you can turn off? And I can tell you right away that there is a big gender difference here, but I'm not going to go into details about that. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. Another question that pops up a lot is the matter of robot romance. This is not really what I'm talking about. And I realized at some point I said in an interview that I like the smell of robots in the morning. It's not what I had in mind, though. I do think we see in our future a situation where we will have robotic companions that we can connect with on an emotional level. The problem with this, or the potentially strange thing about this, is that there is, I think, some limits in our own emotional makeup that will stop us from going too far in that direction. I do not, for instance, see a future for us where we have human-robot marriages. And the reason for that is really that although we can make technologies that fascinate us and we think that we want to be around these things, making something that you can actually love, put yourself in that situation, you want to give up everything for this person. If that is an artificial one, no, I don't really see that happening. So here is the takeaway message, really. For the kids, robots are cool, stay in school. And for the grown-ups, be sure to be wherever you are. Thank you.